At 0742 on May 27, 1940, Captain Jack Churchill crouched behind a crumbling stone wall near the French village of Binet, watching 5 German soldiers advance through morning mist. Behind him, the entire British expeditionary force was fleeing toward Dunkirk, a chaotic retreat that had become a rout. Officers burned documents in ditches. Soldiers threw away rifles to run faster. The Wehrmacht, fresh from crushing Poland in 36 days, was tearing through France at an unprecedented pace. Churchill's company had lost 11 men in 72 hours. The Germans possessed superior tanks, aircraft, and coordination. British forces were being systematically destroyed along every road to the coast. Yet, while others fled, Jack Churchill waited in ambush, not with a rifle or machine gun, but with a 6-foot English longbow. The weapon drew 70 pounds with an effective range of 200 yards in expert hands. Churchill was certainly an expert. He'd represented Britain at the World Archery Championships in Oslo just 11 months earlier, placing 26th among international competitors. Good enough to put an arrow through a playing card at 50 yards. Good enough to kill before his target heard the bowstrings release. The German patrol approached, led by a veteran sergeant who scanned hedgerows and windows for conventional threats. Rifles, grenades, machine guns. He never considered medieval weapons. At 30 yards, Churchill drew the string to his ear, the yew wood creaking under tension. His fingers found the familiar anchor position he'd used 10,000 times in practice. The arrow flew true. The German sergeant dropped without a sound, the shaft buried deep in his chest. It was the first confirmed longbow kill in European warfare since the 17th century. It would be the last of World War II, and it happened because one British officer refused to accept that modern warfare had made ancient weapons obsolete. The unconventional officer. The British Army never understood Jack Churchill. After graduating from Sandhurst in 1926 and serving with the Manchester Regiment in Burma, he'd spent a decade as a conventional infantry officer before quitting in 1936, bored by peacetime soldiering. He'd worked as a newspaper editor in Nairobi, appeared in films as an archer and bagpiper, and ridden motorcycles across India, once crashing into a water buffalo. When war erupted in 1939, Churchill rejoined immediately, but not as a normal officer. He brought his competition longbow, a Scottish broadsword, a basket-hilted claymore his ancestors might have carried, and Highland bagpipes he'd taught himself to play in Burma. Fellow officers thought him eccentric at best, insane at worst. The War Office had no regulations covering medieval weapons in modern combat. Churchill understood something his critics missed. He'd studied military history extensively and knew that psychological warfare mattered as much as firepower in close combat. A man charging with a broadsword while playing bagpipes created a terror that transcended rational thought. An arrow striking silently from nowhere generated fear no bullet could match. Birth of a legend, the British Expeditionary Force evacuated 338,000 soldiers from Dunkirk's beaches between May 26th and June 4th, 1940. Most left their weapons, vehicles, and pride behind. Jack Churchill returned with his bow, sword, and bagpipes intact. He'd covered his company's retreat, killing Germans with museum weapons, He was just beginning. Within weeks, Churchill volunteered for a new unit forming in Scotland, the Commandos. Training exceeded anything the British Army had attempted. 30-mile marches with full equipment, amphibious landings in freezing water, live fire exercises, silent killing techniques. Churchill excelled at everything, despite being older than most volunteers. When he requested permission to bring his medieval arsenal on operations, the Commandos approved. By December 1941, he would lead men onto a frozen Norwegian beach at dawn, bagpipes screaming, broadsword raised, about to prove ancient warfare still had modern applications. Norway, the raid at Vågsøy. Operation Archery targeted the German garrison at Vågsøy, Norway, on December 27, 1941. The island controlled vital shipping lanes and housed 150 German soldiers, coastal artillery, and fish oil factories producing glycerin for explosives. Churchill requested permission to lead the assault on Moløy Island, a fortified position guarding the approach. At 0848, his landing craft's ramp dropped onto the rocky beach. Before anyone could move, Churchill stepped into the surf and began playing the March of the Cameron Men on his bagpipes. The sound cut through explosions and gunfire, the most incongruous noise imaginable on a Norwegian beach under fire. The Germans, trained to fight conventional enemies, couldn't process what they were seeing. Their momentary confusion proved fatal. Churchill finished his tune, set down the pipes, hurled a grenade at the nearest position, drew his broadsword, and charged up the beach, screaming for his men to follow. The assault took 10 minutes. Churchill led from the front, clearing bunkers systematically. The coastal batteries were destroyed, the garrison overwhelmed. When the main force attacking South Vågsøy encountered heavy resistance, Churchill crossed to support them, leading flanking attacks with sword drawn. The raid's success proved that highly trained forces using aggressive tactics, including psychological warfare through unconventional weapons, could defeat fortified positions. Hitler diverted 30,000 additional troops to Norwegian garrison duty. Churchill's reputation spread throughout both Allied and German forces. Sicily and Italy, the art of capture. During the 1943 invasion of Sicily, Churchill commanded No. 2 Commando. The fighting proved brutal. Germans had reinforced with elite paratroopers and panzer divisions. Every village became a fortress. At Salerno in September, the beachhead nearly collapsed under German counterattacks. Churchill's commandos held the critical junction at Vietri sul Mare for 5 days against repeated assaults. On September 14th, he received orders to eliminate a German observation post directing artillery onto Allied positions. The hilltop position was heavily defended. A frontal assault would be suicidal. Churchill took a single corporal and infiltrated at night. Moving through drainage ditches and along walls, they reached the first German position at dawn. Churchill appeared from darkness like a medieval ghost, broadsword drawn. The shocked Germans surrendered immediately. He used his revolver lanyard to lead prisoners to the next position, repeating the process. By sunrise, Churchill and one corporal had captured 42 German soldiers and an entire mortar squad. The wounded pushed on carts by their comrades. Churchill received the Distinguished Service Order for an action accomplished primarily with a sword. Some military records were too unusual for full disclosure. Yugoslavia and capture. By 1944, Churchill operated in Yugoslavia supporting Tito's partisans. In May, he led an assault on the German-held island of Brač. The attack stalled when partisan support failed to materialize. German mortars zeroed in on Churchill's position, killing or wounding his entire command group except Churchill himself, standing apart, playing bagpipes to encourage the advance. Alone on a hillside, ammunition exhausted, escape impossible, Churchill sat on a rock and played "Will Ye No Come Back Again?" a Scottish lament. The approaching Germans couldn't believe the sight. A British officer surrounded by dead comrades, playing music while rifles pointed at him. They captured rather than killed him, too confused and perhaps respectful to shoot. Escape and war's end. The Germans flew Churchill to Berlin, believing anyone named Churchill must be related to the Prime Minister. Disappointed to find no connection, they sent him to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Within 4 months, he and other British officers had tunneled 110 meters to freedom. Recaptured near the Baltic coast, he was transferred to camps in Austria and Italy. In April 1945, as Germany collapsed, Churchill was liberated when Wehrmacht troops protected prisoners from the SS. While others waited for rescue, Churchill walked 150 kilometers through the Alps to American lines. He immediately requested transfer to the Pacific, hoping to use his sword against Japan. The atomic bombs ended the war before he could. Churchill reportedly complained that without the bombs, the war could have continued another 10 years, a dark joke revealing his nature. He thrived in combat, found meaning in chaos, felt most alive when death was closest. Peace was foreign territory, the peaceful warrior. Post-war, Churchill served in Palestine during the violent transition to Israeli independence. He organized the evacuation of 700 Jewish medical personnel trapped at Hadassah Hospital, navigating between hostile forces with his characteristic calm. Asked about his approach, he explained that people were less likely to shoot someone smiling at them. Retiring in 1959 as a lieutenant colonel, Churchill embraced eccentricity. He became one of Britain's first surfers, riding the Severn River's tidal bore in 1955. He built model warships and refurbished steamboats. His train commute became legendary. He'd throw his briefcase from the window at a calculated spot where it would land in his garden, saving the walk from the station. Churchill died peacefully in 1996 at age 89. Newspapers struggled to capture him, noting that if he hadn't existed, fiction couldn't have invented him credibly. He wasn't the most decorated soldier or brilliant tactician of World War II, but he proved something perhaps more important. That individual courage still mattered, that unconventional thinking could overcome superior firepower, that one determined man could accomplish what armies couldn't. His legacy lives in special forces worldwide, who trace their lineage to those Scottish training grounds. In every soldier told something was impossible, who refused to believe it. Jack Churchill, killed with a longbow in the age of tanks, captured prisoners with a sword in the age of machine guns, played bagpipes under mortar fire, escaped concentration camps, and never accepted that medieval warriors had no place in modern warfare. He proved the impossible was merely difficult, that innovation could overcome doctrine, that courage could be measured by holding course when every instinct screamed retreat. On French roads and Norwegian beaches, in Italian mountains and Yugoslav hills, one man with ancient weapons changed what was possible in modern war, not through superior technology, but through the irrepressible force of human will. Jack Churchill's death in 1996 marked the end of an era that had perhaps never truly existed except in his own mind, an era where personal valor could triumph over industrial warfare, where a single warrior's spirit could bend reality to his will. He left behind no memoir, no autobiography detailing his exploits. When pressed by historians and journalists over the years, he would simply say, "People are less likely to believe the truth than fiction. The truth of war is usually quite boring. Long periods of waiting, punctuated by moments of terror." But those who served with him knew better. They remembered the morning at Salerno when German mortars had every approach zeroed in, when movement meant death, and Churchill had simply stood up, drawn his sword, and walked forward as if the enemy's shells were summer rain. They remembered him playing "The Road to the Isles" on his bagpipes, while wounded men were being evacuated under fire, the music somehow making the horror bearable. His military records, declassified decades after the war, revealed incidents he never spoke about publicly. A night action in Yugoslavia where he held a bridge single-handedly for 2 hours with only his sword and a handful of grenades, allowing partisan forces to escape encirclement. A moment in Italy when he walked unarmed between two forces about to engage in friendly fire, his mere presence and authority preventing a tragedy. The commandos he trained went on to become the foundation of Britain's special forces. The Special Air Service, the Special Boat Service, all traced their lineage back to those men who learned that aggression and surprise could overcome numerical superiority, that psychological warfare was as important as firepower, that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Modern military historians struggle to place Churchill in context. He defied every trend of 20th century warfare, mechanization, mass production, technological supremacy. While other nations built bigger tanks and better aircraft, Churchill proved that a determined man with medieval weapons could still influence battles. He was an anachronism who refused to be relegated to history. His influence extended beyond Britain. American special forces studied his tactics. Israeli commandos analyzed his operations. Even Soviet Spetsnaz examined his methods, particularly his use of psychological warfare and unconventional weapons. Military academies worldwide included his actions in their curriculum, usually with disclaimers about not attempting to replicate them. Perhaps his greatest legacy was proving that warfare, despite all its technological evolution, remained fundamentally human. Satellites could see everything. Computers could calculate perfect solutions. Smart bombs could hit precise targets. But in the end, someone still had to walk forward into danger. Someone still had to make the choice between safety and duty. Someone still had to be willing to do the impossible because it needed doing. In his final years, Churchill would sometimes attend military ceremonies, always wearing his medals, always carrying himself with the same erect posture he'd maintained as a young officer. Young soldiers would stare at this relic from another age, this man who had killed with a longbow when their grandfathers were fighting with rifles. Some thought him a curiosity. Others recognized something deeper, a living reminder that courage was timeless. When asked once why he had carried such obsolete weapons into modern combat, Churchill had smiled and given perhaps his most profound answer. "A German officer once told me that my weapons were from the past. I told him that was precisely the point. The past has already proven what works. The future is just theory." He was buried with military honors, his funeral attended by representatives from every regiment he'd served with, from every commando unit that traced its heritage to his influence. They buried him without his sword, bow, or bagpipes. Those had been donated to the Imperial War Museum, where they remain on display, incongruous artifacts that somehow won battles they should have lost. Mad Jack Churchill proved that history's greatest warriors aren't always those with the best weapons or the largest armies. Sometimes they're simply those who refuse to accept that the age of heroes has passed, who carry ancient wisdom into modern battles, who face machine guns with medieval courage and somehow, impossibly, prevail. In an age of industrial death, he remained stubbornly, gloriously, victoriously human. His gravestone bears a simple inscription: Lieutenant Colonel John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill. No mention of the sword, the bow, or the bagpipes. No hint of the legend. But sometimes visitors report, when the wind is just right, you can almost hear the distant skirl of bagpipes playing the March of the Cameron Men, echoing across time from a frozen Norwegian beach where the impossible became inevitable.